All right, with all that said, I want to make a couple key points about validity concepts. All right, the first one is that although the book presents several different kinds of validity, and I think if you read Messick, you'll see that too. Um, the general concept, the general belief that is predominant nowadays, and for quite some time now, is that validity is a unitary concept. And so these different types of validity evidence, construct validity, content validity, predictive validity, criterion validity, and there's a lot of others too, are all just kinds of evidence that are used to make an overall case. And validity is not something that exists or does not exist. There are degrees of validity and degrees of strength of argument for validity. And so I'm citing, I wish I had the book. I do own it, and I couldn't find it this morning. This is like the Bible for validity and reliability. It's published by AERA, APA, and the National Council for Measurement something. The biggest organizations there are. They co-develop this handbook, and they reproduce it every few years. Right? Standards for Educational Psychology Testing. So they say, a sound validity argument integrates, that's the key word, various strands of evidence into a coherent, I would add holistic, account of the degree to which existing evidence and theories support intended interpretation of test scores for specific uses. So it is wrong to say a measurement is valid. It would be more correct to say there is strong evidence for the validity of a measurement. Right, so I want you to start tuning into that kind of nuance when you're reading literature, or especially when you're presenting yourself. That it is misleading to just say, well, the literature says it's valid, so it's valid. You know, that kind of skims over it too much. All right, the second point that I want to make is that Salkind, to me, misrepresents validity theory a little bit. He's a little bit misleading. Salkind says, validity is, most simply, the property of an assessment tool that indicates that the tool does what it says it does. Right? So the part of Salkind that I'm disagreeing with is where he says it's the property of the tool as if validity was part of the tool. It is not. He does get a little bit more accurate when he says does what it says it does. Because measurements themselves are not valid or have strong evidence of validity, except insofar as you relate them to how they're used and interpreted. So, for example, the Keystone Algebra Test may be a valid measure of students' ability to perform algebra on the criteria on the tested eligible tested content. It may very well, I don't know one way or the other, but I suspect it's a valid measure of that outcome, or there could be good evidence that it's a valid measure. However, we now know that it is not a valid measure of the quality of teaching from the algebra teacher, because there's a huge confounding variable. In a sense, the Algebra Keystone is an assessment of poverty, not of algebra learning, when you relate it to a cohort of students and their teacher, right? So the same instrument, strong evidence for validity for one thing, weak evidence for validity for another thing. So the Bible of validity says it this way. Validity refers to the degree to which evidence and theory support the interpretations of test scores for proposed uses of the tests. And then, this is my words, not the book's. When used for more than one purpose, each intended interpretation must be validated. That's my summary of a long section of it. And it finally says, it is incorrect to use the unqualified phrase, the validity of the test. So, I have to admit, I was taught like this, and I taught validity for several years in research methods with the idea that a test is valid or not valid. So I often slip into this incorrect usage. So listen for me to make that mistake, correct me if you want to, or correct it in your head if you want to, and listen for it in your own mind when you're saying it or writing it, and try to use these more nuanced concepts of validity, right? So when you read your article and analyze it from the perspective, from the information Salkind gives. He does give a lot of good information, but also this little nuance difference in what validity actually means. All right, looking forward to seeing your posts online.